some of those speech sounds that are causing problems, then it's much easier for you. I'm getting a little feedback. Okay, got it. Okay, so the sound should go first and then the rest can come after that. Let me show you what I mean. So I kind of divide pronunciation into two areas, okay? So I focus on the sounds first. So there's sort of accuracy of specific sounds. And so when we look at single sounds, like often students have a really hard time with this X sound, the sh sound, as well as that TH sound. The TH sound just makes students crazy. Like they have a really hard time with that sound. And so we really zero in on the sounds that are really causing them problems, and we do activities with those specific sounds. Combination sounds too, these consonant clusters is what they're called, where, you know, we really, and to be fair, sometimes native speakers have a hard time with these, right? I mean, the word six is hard to say, right? So sometimes we have a really difficult time getting those sounds out, and non-native speakers really struggle with those. So we work on those first. Then we go to some of these larger issues, which we'll talk about toward the end, which are these sort of speech patterns, striking and rhythm, and we'll talk about that as we go forward, okay? So let me just talk about the sounds first. Making sounds in English starts with what we call, you don't have to know these terms, but they're called phonemes. They're like the little bits of sound that make up the English language, okay? So when we hear the word phonemes, phonemic, that's what they're talking about. I'm going to throw a couple charts at you, and I'm only doing that because you may have some students that come to you understanding what some of these symbols are, and you may have some students who have no idea what these symbols are. I've worked with both students. So sometimes I have students who say to me, can you talk to me about, you know, what the English sounds and use the International Phonetic Alphabet? Okay, and the National Phonetic Alphabet are basically these symbols for the sounds. Okay, so if you have a student who comes to you and starts writing these on a piece of paper, you know, and using these, then you understand what this is. So this is just a reference for you. But it also helps you to determine what the sound is in the word. So it gives you each of the words. So P as in pen, B as in big. Okay, so it gives you a word that corresponds with each of the sounds. It also lists all your vowel sounds as well as your diphthongs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Okay, I'm going to focus more on this chart, which we'll talk about along with this sort of chart of our faces. Okay, so I've actually taken this chart, which is in your handout, and I've moved it to this page right here, which shows your face, your head, okay? One of the things that I do with my students is I really, really need to make them feel the sound, where the sound is coming from, how the sound is created, okay? So this chart right here goes over in writing exactly what I'm going to tell you. So it actually tells you how the sound is created, and that's why I put this in here. But for the most part, what you need to know is sounds are created by voice, either voiced or voiceless, how you voice or not voice something. They're created by the position of your mouth, and they're created by the flow of air. Okay, so those three things: voice, using voice or not using voice, the flow of air, and the position of your mouth. And that's what happens with a sound. You actually have an advantage here in that your student can kind of see you up close and personal with your Zoom. And so you can literally like show them what your mouth is doing. Sometimes in a classroom, my students can't see very clearly because I'm standing up at the front if I ever get back into a classroom. So, you know, they have a hard time seeing me. But you have an advantage in that they can see what your mouth is doing when you make that sound. And I also tell them, and I'll say this again, but to use mirrors. I say grab a mirror, put it in front of you so you can determine what's happening with your mouth. So what this chart does for you, and I'm just going to go back to my face, okay, is it tells you what is happening with each sound. So the International Phonetic Alphabet, the blank spaces here are other languages. In other words, there are sounds in other languages that are not on this chart, okay? So the sounds, what you see here are basically all the sounds in English. And you don't have to know these symbols again. I'm gonna go over and show you the corresponding words so you see what those sounds do. But if we start up here, what this means is bilabial. So if you look at your mouth, the diagram here of your mouth, this right here is that p sound. P. So it's the two lips that's what's making this sound. We have these sounds up here are called stops. And what that means is that you literally stop the sound and then you release it, okay? So when you say p, you're stopping the flow of air and then you release it. And that's how you make that sound. Here's the most important thing. Not only do I make my students look at their mouths, which they really hate, but it's really important, okay? But I also make them put their hand on their throat. Because the other thing is, what you'll notice is that these sounds, one is voiced and one is voiceless. And your mouth does not move. It stays the same. The airflow stays the same. The only thing different is that one is voiced and one is voiceless. So when you say p and you put your hands here, there's no vibration. P, p. But when you say pa, pa, there's a vibration. So it's really important for them to understand that the difference between these two, pa, pa. And we call these minimal pairs. In other words, your mouth doesn't move, but the sound is just a little bit different based on the voicing, the minimal pairs. Okay, same thing up here with these sounds here. T, duh, t, duh. So when we have these sounds, we've got this stop, we're stopping the airflow and it's moving forward. And so what you're seeing is this bilabial right here. If we move back on the mouth, the next thing we have is labial dental, which basically means labia, the lips, and your teeth. So the sound we have here is the F sound. And okay, so labial dental. And I always tell my students, you have to, this V sound, it has to tickle. If it doesn't tickle, you're not doing it right. You have to tickle your lip, okay? So, and then they kind of get it. They sort of understand. Okay, so labial dental starts here with your lip and your teeth. Then we move back to dental, and dental is your teeth, right? So when you have your dental, interdental, which means between the teeth, this is that really hard sound with the tongue. And I always tell my students, and they hate this, but I say, if I don't see your tongue, I'm not doing it right. I have to see the tip of your tongue, right? So, and then the counterpart to that, the minimal pair is, okay? So like thought and breathe, those two sounds. Okay, so interdental, between the teeth. Now, when we look at F and V and this TH sound that's voiced and voiceless, these sounds are called fricatives, and fricative means that you don't have to know specifically these terms, but fricative means that the airflow is constricted. In other words, I don't stop the air, but something's in the way to constrict that air. So these sounds always have a hiss sound to them, right? So when I make F, it's got a little hiss to it, right? When I make TH, it's got a little hiss to it, and it's because I'm obstructing the air. And so the air is flowing either out the sides of my mouth or from the center of my mouth, depending on what sound I'm making. And I'm getting that hiss sound. Okay, so that's what a fricative means, and that's where these sounds are coming from. So then we're gonna move back and we go to the alveolar sounds. So if we look at this chart right here, notice that after your teeth, you have this little ridge right behind your teeth. It's like a little hill that it's holding your teeth in. That's the alveolar ridge. And Your tongue hits that for a variety of sounds. The first one are these stop sounds here, like T and D. So notice that your tongue, when you say t, 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 hits that ridge. T, and then D, da, da, t, da, right? And then S, what happens is your tongue positions on that ridge. Your teeth clench, the air flows through your teeth to make that hiss sound. Okay, and zzz, some of the counterpart is that Z sound. Okay, so that's the alveolar sound that we have right here. And then we go back a little bit, right? And we have post-alveolar sounds, which are the shh. So your tongue is moving back a little bit. So it's basically pulling back right behind that ridge when we make these sounds. Shh. It's the tip of your tongue is near that ridge. The sides of my tongue are pushing up against my mouth. The air is literally flowing as if my tongue were concave like this. The air is literally flowing between, like in the middle of my tongue, and it's coming out my teeth, which are clenched. So I'm getting that shh sound. Shh. So I'm obstructing air, and then the counterpart here is zh, right? So we have, let me see what they give you. They don't actually. So for instance, if I say, I've got to think of a word. Post-alveolar, oh, they do, Asia, right? And should, Asia and should, okay? And the other part of this is the other is made when your tongue is in this position, in this post-alveolar position. Tongue is essentially in the same place, shh, zh, but what happens is we stop the airflow and then we let it burst out. And that's called an affricate. These are also very difficult sounds for students. So this sound here is ch, like in chalk, ch, okay? So ch, and the counterpart to that is ja, like in judge, ch, ja. Okay, so notice we stop the air and let it burst, which is different than one of these stop sounds. The stop sounds have a really light aspiration. So it's not really hard, okay? But an affricate, you literally hear, you can almost feel it. You should feel the air coming out, okay? Ja, ja. So there's a burst of air that comes out, okay? Palatal then is, we've got this hard palate right here after your alveolar ridge, and that's what you're looking at for your palatal. The only palatal sound we really have is this Y sound, which is also what we call a glide. It's almost very close to a vowel sound. And so that's where your tongue is positioned basically in the middle of your mouth. Yeah, yeah, okay? And there's really no constriction, but it does function like a consonant. So it's not a vowel really. It functions like a consonant because your tongue is tense and it's moving in, in this, it functions like a consonant. So we call these glides. Wa is also one of the glides, wa. Okay, so in a lot of ways, it pronunciation-wise, like a vowel, but in grammatical terms, it's definitely a consonant. Okay, the velar then is in the back. So after we go back, we hit your soft palate right back here, where it really is soft, okay? And the sounds that we have there are your k, k sound, okay, as in cat. And the other sound is your g, g, as in go. Okay, so cat and go. And so those sounds hit your velar ridge, this soft palate back here. And then we finally get to the back of your throat, the very back. And these are your glottal sounds. So right down in the deepness of your throat, that's where we create the, and notice it's that hiss sound. It's one of those fricatives, right? So I'm really constricting, not completely, but a little bit, those muscles in my glottis here, and then the air flows through to make that sound, okay? The other one is actually what we call a glottal stop, and we do have this in English, but this is mostly for British English. They do this with a lot of words. So for us, you hear it say in like uh-oh. And notice that I stopped the air in the back when I hit this hyphen right here, uh-oh, okay? But in British English, they like to stop words that, stop consonants we would actually pronounce. So say in the word fitness, we would say fitness with a T. They actually use a glottal stop. They say fit, right back here, fitness, fitness. So British English does some different things, and so that's why we put it on our chart, because it's still an English sound. We just don't use it as much in the United States. Okay, the other sounds that you have here are your nasal sounds, and nasal basically means you close your mouth and the air comes through your nose. Basically, you're humming with your nose. So the nasal sound here, you have with your mouth closed, and it's a bilabial sound because your lips, okay? And the alveolar sound then is what's really hard about this, my last name is Meloche. These sounds sound exactly the same. I mean, it's very difficult to hear them. So contextually is how you want to hear these, right? So I always have to say to when I'm spelling my name, M as in Mary, so that people know it's not an N, because they always want to say N. So the sounds sound very similar, but we do have and then that sound where my tongue is attached to my alveolar ridge, and the air comes out my nose, okay? And the other one is this velar sound, which is as in like sing with an sound. So it's in the very back here, and I close my glottis, and the air comes out my nose, okay? And all of the nasals are voiced. All of them are voiced. It's like singing, okay? So they all come out, it's like you're humming the whole time, all right? And the other sounds we have are what we call liquids, and these are also very difficult sounds for non-native speakers, and it's the L, O, and the R, and we call them liquids because the vowels often move straight into them very quickly. We actually have a vowel sound that is almost like a sound that often we equate with a vowel sound just because it's so common in English. And so these are your liquids. So the L is where your tongue is on the back of your ridge, oh, and the air flows out the side. And the R is where and I always tell my students with R, because they have a really hard time with it. I tell them I have to see their mouth. It has to be tense, right? And I make them, it's actually really funny looking at a class doing this, but I make them, their lips have to be really tight as they're speaking, Okay, so once they master these sounds, then we can move forward with everything else. But the sounds are really important for them to really master. In order to do that, in order to kind of target the sounds that you need to target, I give them sort of a little minimal pairs test. In other words, I take these sounds that students often confuse, and I go ahead and give them one of these tests to determine what sounds they're having trouble with and what vowel sounds they're having trouble with. And as I'm looking at this, I realize, let me pull this back up here, sorry. There we go. I realized that I am gonna get out of this really quickly. I should have given you one of these, and I'll send it to Lori for you. But can you see this? Yes? Okay, so this comes from a packet that I did with my, what we call a bridge class. So these are basically beginning students. They've never had English before. I actually had a student who got off the plane from China and walked straight into my class, like the next day. So this comes from this beginning packet, and I'll send it to Lori so that she can send it on to you. But I love this guy. He's my vowel guy. Okay, he tells you what's happening with your vowel sounds, and I think he's super cool. And this is the chart that we often use to tell the students kind of where their tongue is and what their mouth is doing. So this is the front of your mouth right here, and this is the height where your tongue is. Is it high in your mouth? Is it middle of your mouth? Is it low in your mouth? And this is how forward or backward your tongue is, okay? So if I look at what's happening in this little guy's mouth, what we see is that when his tongue is forward and high, we get the sound E, E, okay? And so if you feel your tongue, you realize it's forward, and it's also nice and tense and toward the top of your mouth, E, E, okay? We also have this eh sound. Your tongue stays in the same place. The difference between these two is these sounds tend to be very relaxed. You relax your muscles more. So E is different than eh, E, eh, E, eh. So notice that I have to tense my mouth, my muscles, to get this E sound out. It's very important that students do that. So we work on that as well. Make sure that their mouth is doing the right thing. And eh. And then we have A and eh. And then we have ah. So notice that we have these words, eat, it, ate, et, at. Okay, so all of those vowel sounds. In the middle, we have what we call the schwa, which is basically this sound, It's the most common sound in English. Okay, so when we say words have some form of, well, I shouldn't say most words, many words have some form of in them. So Rosa, okay, so here we have but, okay. So this is the where your mouth is perfectly relaxed and we just basically grunt, okay, that's all that's happening. Here you'll notice that my little guy has this ER sound here, okay? Some people consider that a vowel, some people don't, but the sound BERT, and it's just because sounds very vowelish, okay? And then here we have ah, as in Bob. They've put it over here on this chart, and they've used the word bomb, ah. So notice your tongue is pulled back, your tongue is very low, ah, okay? And I'm actually, my students' mouths are nice and open for that, ah, bomb, okay? You want to exaggerate what they're doing, just so they feel it. It's really important that you're exaggerating. So I always say open wider, get that sound out, it's gotta come out, okay? And then we have this sound right here, which is really difficult for many students, and they have a really hard time hearing it. So it's the sound ah, ah, which is different than O or ah, okay? Ah, and it requires a more rounding of the lips. So as in ball, ball. Here they have the word bore, and what that means is you have ah sound moving into an or, R, okay, R, bore, okay? And then O as in boat or slope. And then we have which is a relaxed sound, as in put or book, and ooh, which is a tense sound, ooh. And I have to see my students' mouths do that, ooh, as in boot, okay? Send this to Lori so you guys have this, and you can use this little guy with your students if it helps you so that they understand. The other thing I want to show you, which I think is really important, and I have it on my phone, it's an app, but you can also get it online, is this right here. It's the Sounds of Speech. And the app does exactly what they do here. It comes out of the University of Iowa. I've used it for years. I think it's awesome. And I think it's awesome because you can take a sound and then they give you this beautiful animation of the sound. I'm not sure if you can hear what's on my computer, but when you play it, it literally shows you what's happening in your mouth. So here's the peep. And they can hear the sound, they can see what's happening in the mouth, they can see the tongue moving. So it's just a really beautiful, beautiful tool to use with your students. They can see what's happening, okay? Love it, I love it. So if they're not sure, they can download this app. It's free, I believe. I didn't pay for it. And then they can go ahead and see what, and there are others too. So I'll show you the others that I've given you. There's a list of apps that they can use. Let me go back here. Okay, so back to assessing your students. So you kind of look and see what problems they're having. I literally make them say, these words side by side, and then I'll mark what I notice they're having trouble with. I've given you another assessment tool right here, which you can click on to help with minimal pairs and some of these problem sounds that they're having. I also have them read just a passage, okay? And here's a diagnostic passage all over the place. So the passage then not only tells me the sounds, but it tells me also some of those rhythm issues that they might be having, which we'll talk about. Okay, so intonation issues, stress issues. So I have them record it or on their phone and send me the recording, you know, however you want to do it. And then as they're talking, I have my highlighter or my pen, and every time they make a mistake, I just mark it. And then I go through and I look and see how I can help them. Okay, so clearly this sound is a problem. You're having intonation issues here. You're getting the stress wrong in some words, those kinds of things. Okay, and then I know what to do for them. This is just for your benefit. I'm not going to go over this, but these are just some sounds in various language groups that students have trouble with in that language group. Now, let me just give you a caveat for this. Everyone has their own problems. Okay, it depends on how they've learned, where they've learned, what they've learned, if they're mixing, you know, two different dialects from their language, whatever, okay? So just because it's on this list doesn't mean that your student won't, you know, will have the problem. It also doesn't mean that your student won't have other problems, okay? So make sure that you're really assessing your student. But there's a starting point for you if you need it, okay? Activities for problem sounds. So at this point, then, once you've determined what the problems are your students are having, or your student is having, then you can ask them, you know, you can start doing some of these activities with them. Let me say this too about pronunciation. I never teach pronunciation without listening. In other words, the skill of listening, it goes hand in hand with pronunciation. They must be able to hear it in order to be able to produce it, okay? They have to hear the sound. So it's really important that you as a tutor help them by saying it, by continuing to repeat it, by continuing to correct them. So I will do something like this kind of chart here where I say a word and they have to tell me which word I'm saying, right? So do I say leave or live? What do you hear? And then after we work on those, I'll put these words into some kind of, you know, some sentences or some conversation. You know, so do you want to leave or do you want to live? And they have to determine which one I'm saying. And then they have to say the sentence, right? So that will help them to not only hear it, but then also produce the sound. Okay, so that's really important. I also, as I said, I make them use mirrors, whether or not they like it. They need to see what their mouths are doing. It's really important that they do that. Tongue twisters are also really important, especially for those, and they're kind of fun, especially for those TH sounds. The TH sounds are fun with tongue twisters. The SH sound, shh, that's really fun with tongue twisters as well. There's some games here, pronunciation games for you. And then this link right here gives you some pronunciation apps. I think there are 5 of them, but the one that I was using was Sounds of Speech. I'm not sure if it's listed on this list, but there are many out there that are free, so students can just download them. Okay, and let me make sure before, yep, okay, so I'm gonna stop right here. Are there any questions about sounds that you want answers to before I move forward with the other aspects of pronunciation?
You'll just have to unmute yourself. I can't do that. So if you have a question, go ahead and.
Or I can try and see the chat. Let me see. I have chat. Okay.
Chat,
Okay. You can also put it in chat if you want.
Okay. I have a question, Heather.
Sure.
My student is from South Korea, and I'm looking at this list in column, any of them, he adds an to at the end of every word. Liva, liva, picha, pitcha. and I'm working with them and working with them. Is this one of those things that, going back to your beginning, you say there's some things that that in expectations that probably will continue? How do I work on that extra?
I actually would say no. I actually say that he might do that, you know, in some instances, but I think he can cut down on that. And that actually goes into the next section that we're going to look at. That's actually a linking issue. He's trying to link the sound, link one word to the next word. And I have a lot of Spanish students. I have a lot of refugees from Latin America, and they come up and they, you know, they love to, instead of saying, they can't just start a word with S, they have to start it with S, like ES, right? So they can't say stable, they say estable, right? So they're doing this as well. They're trying to get to the sound without necessarily linking. So I think some of the linking activities that we do might help you a little bit with that. Can he cut down completely? It really is all about how conscious he is of making those sounds. And let me say this too. I mean, there are very, very few students that I have met who have really lost their accent. And often, you know, the students that I have met or the friends that I have a really great friend from Romania who really, I can't even tell that she's from Romania, but when she's tired, when she's, you know, if she's had a glass of wine, I know she's from Romania, okay? Like, so it all depends too on what his state of mind is. If he's, you know, had a long day, if he's stressed, if he's tired, you're gonna get more, you know, it's just really hard to control it because it really does require a conscious effort to stop making those sounds.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, any other questions? Okay.
I have a question, Heather. My student is also South Korean, and we're struggling a lot with ending sounds, particularly past tense. She wants everything to be its own syllable, you know, instead of watched, it's watch ed and believe ed, and it occurs to me now that English does have some different sounds, ending sounds.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure how to teach rules or what to do about that.
Okay, so I have a chart on rules for you with specifically past tense, so we can talk about that. And again, if you think about what you just said, those are consonant clusters, and they're very hard. The CH moving into a T, that's a really difficult sound to make for many people, right? So, but I have a chart, so we'll look at that toward the end, okay? Any other questions?
I would think that you really have to tell them that you have to memorize the pronunciation of many of the words, because if you try to read letter for letter, you're going to be off. So you really have to memorize pronunciation of words.
Right, so I mean, you can't really learn language, you can't just really learn one skill. I always tell my students, you have to, you know, really look at language in totality. You have to really work on reading so that you get a lot of vocabulary, so that you're seeing those words a lot, and then you're learning how to pronounce those words as well as spell those words. I mean, yes, absolutely. You can't just say that it's not like Spanish, right? This is why I love Spanish. It's why I could never go into French, because there's so many, like, you know, letters that they don't say, right? Like in Spanish, they say the letters, right? If it's there, you say it. So we don't do that in English, and it's very difficult for a lot of students because they're not, and we switch up the rules. We're not fair, right? We have one rule, and then all of a sudden there's an exception to that rule, and we break the rule. And I always, on a daily basis, I literally apologize for English. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the English language. I feel bad. I'm sorry, right? Because the students get confused. And so yes, they have to have repeated exposure to certain words in order to be able to understand how they're not only written, but how they're pronounced.
And it also has to do with the use of a word. I mean, we have several words that you pronounce two different ways. So
right. And
it's all in context. The
yes,
word that you're pronouncing is in context. It's not when you're reading. And that's the big problem when they're reading. And many people have learned English over in another country, but they don't teach them pronunciation. So
right, absolutely.
So they have to relearn.
Yes, yes, they do, absolutely. And so, you know, it's fabulous that they're here, and it's fabulous that they're getting the native speaker experience, right? And so they're learning from where they should be. But I think that definitely they've come over with their own idea of what English is, and then they do have to relearn it. I think you're absolutely right. And likewise, I worked in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Mexico. I did my internship down there, and I had years of Spanish, and I thought I knew Spanish. I had no idea what Spanish was. I had to relearn it when I got down there, and I still didn't learn all of it by the time I left. Okay. Okay. Any other questions before we move forward? Okay. So let's go forward. Let me just minimize this. Let me go this way. Okay, so we're going to move on to syllable and word stress. Let me just check my time real quick. Okay, and I'm going to go over this sort of somewhat quickly. Syllable and word stress are deal with pitch. So when we talk about stress, we are talking about, you know, how high and how the vibration of your vocal cords. So the sound pitch is the how high your voice is going, how low your voice is going, and it varies as we're going through, right? So I'm going to Harvard, not Yale, and the pitch is really important to determine what we're saying, as well as the syllables that we're trying to stress in a word. Okay, so pitch, and the pitch range varies depending on the word and depending on the sentence. So when we talk about syllable stress, to John's point, some words that we say one way in terms of stress, and that same word would be said in a different way depending on the part of speech. So we have to be very careful of that and make sure that we tell our students, recognize that these are the differences here. So some of the rules that we have are most two-syllable nouns, you have the first syllable that is stressed. So climate, knowledge, record, okay? Same thing with most two-syllable adjectives. When we look at verbs, we tend to stress the last syllable. So require, decide, record. So notice the difference between record, which is our noun, and record, which is our verb, okay? And this happens a lot in English. So we just have to make sure that they understand the context, the context that it's in, the grammar that's going on there. That's really important. Okay, we have these words that end in IC, tend to have that second to the last syllable stress. So ecstatic, okay, and notice I get that stress. It's that pitch that goes up. It's that volume that goes up a little bit. Okay, same thing with TION and TION or SION. So retribution, extension. Okay, and with really long words, we tend to do the third to the last syllable. So uncertainty, geography, okay? So we tend to do these, again, there's exceptions to all of these, but that's what we tend to do. I've given you this link as well. This right here is the Cambridge English Dictionary, and they will pronounce all the words for you. So if the students look up the word and there's a little, like, you know, little, what do you call it, audio symbol, you know, like a little microphone, and they can just tap on it and then it'll tell them the word. So that's helpful as well. Okay, and then this is just another chart that kind of makes it much more basic than what I just said. So in essence, the two-syllable words, let's go to the three-syllable words. We tend to kind of do this second to the last syllable in many of our words. So education, congratulations, underestimation. So we tend to, it's generally the second to the last, but again, it changes based on the grammar. So activities for syllable stress, the way that I do this generally is, again, this is about listening to it. They have to listen to it and hear it before they can actually pronounce it. So often what I will do is I'll give them a chart like this, and I will say to them, okay, here are some words, and I will say these words, and I need them to determine the so empty. So this is stressed, unstressed, right? Empty. And so when I say these words, then they have to put it in their correct column. So guitar, empty. So down here too, saying these phrases as well. And then I will say them, and then they can say, all right? So they have to listen to it before, and hear it before they actually are able to pronounce these in the correct way, okay? Another activity is, which I think is beautiful, I would use this in my classroom in a second, You want to make sure that you expose your students to these words before you play this game. In other words, go through and say these words with them. But what this is they start with this word, important. So you've got that stress on that second syllable, and they have to follow the pattern. So in order to get out of the maze. So they have to do the same stress pattern in order to get out of the maze. And the next one gives you the answers. Behavior, confusion, abandon, substantial. So in order to get out of the maze, they're following that pattern. And you can do this with any pattern. It's a beautiful activity. I love that. Okay, content words. This is about word stress now. So now we're moving from syllable stress, stress on various syllables in a word, to word stress, stress on whole words in a sentence. And what happens is we tend to stress the content words as well as opposed to the structure words. So your structure words are things like articles, prepositions, conjunctions. They're basically just the little tiny grammar pieces that connect a sentence together, like the glue, right? But the content words are the meaning. That's what we stress most of all. So these are your nouns, your verbs, your adverbs, your adjectives. I'm sorry, the class is full. So notice that we have this stress on these words, okay? No, you can't come. So often we will, any interjections, any negatives tend to be stressed. Those are important in speech when we're trying to say yes or no. And WH words are stressed. What are you saying? Okay, so we tend to stress those. And also, let me go back here. Also, notice that if you don't stress it correctly, you may hear it incorrectly. So here's a good example. You enjoy history as opposed to you enjoy his story. Okay, so when you get the stress wrong, you might be looking at something different in the sentence and something else is stressed and therefore the meaning changes in the sentence. Okay, this is just another chart that tells you what content words are function words. Okay, so it tells you which is which. Focus words in a sentence then, these are the words that basically get the loudest stress in a sentence, and it's what I really want to focus on the most. So when we talk about pitch, we talk about low, mid, and high. So I may have content words that are mid-pitch. In other words, I'm still stressing them, but the most important word in a sentence or syllable in a sentence is going to get the highest pitch. So I don't know where the sentence goes. Taylor Swift is amazing. Okay, so I'm telling you what this person thinks of Taylor Swift. Okay, I'm going to college. So notice that I'm focusing on that stress to tell you what's really, really important in the sentence. So the focus words then get the most stress. They are the loudest words in each sentence, and they convey the meaning based on this pitch that we are giving to our listener. What's important about that is the meaning then is conveyed based on, you know, how high you say these. So based on what is stressed, that's what you're going to be conveying. So for instance, if stress, Jack will cycle to the restaurant tonight, the question that would have been asked in order to respond this way is, who will cycle to the restaurant tonight? Who will cycle to the restaurant tonight? Jack will cycle to the restaurant tonight. Okay? Will Jack cycle to the restaurant tonight? Jack will cycle to the restaurant tonight. Do you notice how the responses correspond with what is being asked? And so depending on what you're saying, that's what you're conveying. That's the meaning you're trying to convey. How will Jack get to the restaurant tonight? Jack will cycle to the restaurant tonight. Okay? So the questions and the statements then correspond. So based on what is being stressed, that's what the student is trying to convey or conveying, whether or not they're trying to. Okay? Sometimes we will, with students, we'll literally make them like pad it out and feel it, right? So this whole thing where we like are da 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 da. So we're trying to make them feel that. And for students who are very kinesthetic learners, that's really important, right? You have to kind of know how your student learns. Are they visual learners? Are they auditory learners? Are they, you know, are they moving all the time when you're talking to them? You know, sometimes this whole patting, you know, and pounding on the table as they're doing this rhythm is really helpful. Okay, jazz chants then are helpful too because, and there's a whole list of them and you can hear them. And basically these are just little sentences, little poems that really focus on some of that stress, okay? I have a terrible sense of direction. So it's really focusing on what the speaker is trying to convey and the meaning that they're trying to state. So these are little jazz chants that, and here's a link for you that you can use with your student. Intonation. Intonation then are these musical patterns of up and down. It's not just, often you will hear it, you'll hear it most at the end of sentences, so that's important. But you will definitely hear it through the sentence. A lot of Indian speakers have a hard time with intonation. They might have really great English, but their intonation is really like almost backwards from what we would do. And so sometimes I don't understand, I have a hard time with Indian speakers just because of the intonation. I have to ask them to repeat themselves. So intonation then is this sort of rising and falling of sound. And it often serves a grammatical function. So if we look at the patterns, sorry, this is a little bit blurry, but the falling at the end of a sentence tends to be in declarative sentences. So I live in France. Notice how I fall. Right? Commands, sit down, okay? Exclamatory sentences. It's a wonderful girl. And also in terms of a list, notice when I do a list, I rise, and then fall. I like cars, trucks, and bikes, and I fall, right? And also WH questions, which are very different from yes/no questions. And we'll look at that in just a second. But WH questions, where do you live? Okay, and I'm going up, which tells my listener, this is a WH question. I need more than a yes, no from you. It's a cue, and it's really important. And also tag questions. You live in France, don't you? Okay, so tag questions do that too. Rising intonation, we use with yes, no questions. Are you French? No, are you French? Okay, and then in every, in the list, I like cars, trucks, and bikes, okay? And then sometimes we do it with introductory sentences as well. So if she calls, if she calls, ask her to come, is what we're saying, okay? Or direct address, and then tag questions sometimes too, okay? So it depends. Okay, so if I go to this right here, intonation, yes, no questions, and WH questions. So this is really important, and I do this with my students all the time. We practice both, right? So with the falling intonation, these are statements as well as yes, no question, or WH questions. So what's your name? Where does he live? Why did you do that? Sorry, so I'm going up, okay? And then, or I'm going down rather. And then for rising intonation, this is your yes, no question. Is it a good film? Or is the film good? Are we leaving soon? Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going through and showing them the difference between the two questions. All right, so intonation activities then. I have these conversations here and we go through and kind of give them, they can go through and read it and we practice it together. And then these are sort of sentences that go through and show them the ups and downs of both, okay, falling in and rising. Okay, connecting, I'm running out of time. So connecting and linking, basically this goes back to where you were, connecting and linking. Someone asked me about their South Korean student. Connecting and linking, and these are the basic rules for connecting and linking. When we've got two consonant sounds that are the same, then we tend to say those sounds, and we just hold it a little bit longer. So we say once, okay, once, twice, and notice that my tongue is in exactly the same place, and we just tend to hold it just a little bit longer and then move forward. Okay, and when you link two sounds together at the beginning, it sounds like the consonant vowels to the next word. So what this means is these are linked together. I don't stop here. So I would say clean up, clean up. Okay, so when there's a vowel here, I just move straight into the next word. And sometimes, and we practice that with students as well. Let me say this too about some of this linking and some of these reductions. Sometimes it's hard for them to do. I try and get them to link as much as possible. But when we talk about some of the reductions, I always just tell them they need to understand what's being said. So even if you're having a hard time linking, as long as you understand what's happening when a speaker is talking to you, that they're linking these words, that's really important, right? You're getting the sense, you understand what they're trying to say, even though the words aren't necessarily separated. Okay, so they may not be able to produce it, but it's also important, it's really important for them to hear it. Does that make sense? Okay, so ate breakfast. So here I'm linking these two here, the two consonant sounds that are different, and the first sound often changes to be more like the next sound. So ate breakfast, ate breakfast. And what happens is we almost drop this sound out, ate breakfast, to move forward, okay? Bad credit, bad, and I actually almost drop the D off and go straight to the C. Okay, and then we have these sounds here. So oftentimes when a sound is surrounded by two vowels, the sound sounds like a voiced sound. So metal does not sound like metal, it sounds like metal. Sounds like a D because it's voiced. It's really hard for us to make that unvoiced, okay? And we call that a flap, actually. Our tongue is flapping when we do that, okay? All right, so for the sake of time, I'm just gonna let you look at some of these. These are just some of your linking activities, and these are some linking conversations you can do. Here are some sentences you can say to your students so they can determine if you are linking or not linking. Some of these are really important for you to kind of get them to see how some of the sounds change when you're linking, okay? So did ya and don't ya, we say that all the time, okay? So did you eat your vegetables? Don't you do this? So the sounds kind of alter based on how we're linking some of these words. And then here's some more activities for you, okay? So connecting speech and letting them listen to it. So these are partners. So you say this one and they fill it in here. They say this one and you fill it in here. Okay, so these are two partners, a partner activity for you. Okay, and reducing words. And again, I don't expect my students to reduce. I don't expect them to say gimme or lemme or wanna, okay? But I do expect them to understand when a speaker says it to them. So that's why I tell them what's going on with the language, okay? And so these are some of the commonly reduced words that we use in English. These are some of the common expressions that we use that are reduced, okay? Same thing here, and they're used in a sentence. Gotcha, gonna, lemma, wanna, kinda, gimme, doing. We say this all the time. We do it all the time, okay? Thought groups then are just basically where we chunk language. So often we will put language into different bits in order to make it easy to understand. So thought groups are often just like phrases or clauses that we stop at. So if I look at some thought groups, I would say something like, what's your favorite music group? And it says, here's a good example, I love you too. And it says, I love you too, but what's your favorite music group? Okay, so this person is not listening to what's being talked about. Okay, they're actually kind of going someplace else. But here's a good example too. I've learned that people will forget what you said, thought group, stop. People will forget what you did, thought group, stop. But people will never forget how you made them feel, stop, by the amazing Maya Angelou, who's got my heart. So, so this is, a good example of how we stop and chunk that language, okay? Here's some more thought groups for you. We often do this with phone numbers, okay? Often with phone numbers, with addresses, we do this. So when you're practicing those things with your student, That's really important. We chunk those numbers and those addresses so that they're easy to understand, okay? And here's a good example that you can practice with your student for thought groups that just gives you some breaks and they can practice that. Here's an example of some silly sentences you can make with different thought groups, and you just pick cards and then you make these kind of silly sentences where you stop with these thought groups as you chunk the language up. Okay, pronunciation of S, let me finish with this. Pronunciation of S and ED. Okay, so this goes back to the question that I got before. Notice what happens when you have at the very end of this is grammar, basically spelling, grammar, and pronunciation mixed all together. So whenever you have a voiced sound at the end of a word, like race, I lied, races, yes, race. Okay, so a voiced sound, race says, okay, then it becomes an is sound, bus says, boxes, okay, I lied, let me back up, sorry. These are actually the S sound, the X sound, the Z sound, and the S, and the CH sound, and the SH sound. So anytime you have one of these sounds, yes, anytime you have one of these sounds, you're gonna get the extra syllable. So races, buses, boxes. So we do this because it's hard to say, and I can't just go straight into one of these sounds that is very hissy without making an extra syllable, okay? So I have to say races. I can't say races, it doesn't work, okay? I have to say prizes, I have to. It's just, that's how it comes out. But if I have a voiceless sound at the end, it's gonna come out with a voiceless S. So sleep becomes sleeps. Book becomes books. And if I have a voiced sound at the end, then my sound is going to sound like a Z. It's going to be voiced. So crab becomes crabs. Okay? So this is all about convenience with pronunciation. It just is what it has to be in order to conveniently say the word. Okay? So that's how that one works. Your ED, these are your rules for ED. If the word ends in T or D, then you have an extra syllable. There's your ed, okay? So wanted, needed. If the word ends in a voiced or a voiceless sound, let's say voiceless sound like a P or a K, then the sounds that you're going to create at the end will sound like a T. So help becomes helped. Look becomes looked. Sniff, sniffed, okay? Likewise, if it is a voiced sound, then the sound you hear at the end is going to sound like a D, a voiced sound. Called, cleaned, offered, okay? So for your student who's having a hard time with these, both the S's as well as the ED endings, I would do some little sentences or, you know, conversations mixing some of these words and have them practice those words. Stop for each word, have them look at what's happening grammatically, and then have them, you know, be pronouncing it, and along with your guidance of saying the word as well so that they hear it and hear how it's connecting to the next word, and hear also how that word is functioning, okay? And also if you have a vowel sound too, notice if it ends in a vowel, vowels are always voiced. So you're gonna get a voice sound at the end. Freed, okay, tried, okay? Okay, I'm not gonna go over that. The only other thing I have to say is that you have the last bits of language deal basically with presentations. And I don't know if any of you have students who are business people, but you know, presentation is all about volume, it's all about speed. I have students who sometimes speak so quickly and I have to tell them, slow down, right? So the speed, the volume, the attitude and emotion, all of those things that they are using, sometimes I have to monitor those things as well. And it becomes more important when I have someone in the business environment, when they're going to work and they're trying to do these little mini presentations or doing Zoom calls or whatever. And they really need to monitor themselves to be understood. Okay? Okay. And then we have just a couple of extra links for you with some activities toward the end. Okay? Okay, out of time, do you have questions? Silence. No questions. Silence. Okay. Then I think I'm set. What else would you like me to do, Lori?
Does anybody have any clarifications?
I have a question that I wanted to ask.
I
When
want to
you're
thank you. All this is looks like wonderful
Great.
material to use. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Go ahead, Carol, you had a question?
Yes, I do. When you are teaching pronunciation or speech or whatever this course is called, are you also teaching grammar? Do they understand the context of these words, that some things are nouns or verbs or adjectives or whatever?
Well, so, I mean, it depends on the level of the student, right? So, I mean, when my students, so let's just take a beginning student, for instance. I mean, in conjunction with teaching this, I am telling them, this is what a noun is. A noun is a person, place, or thing, right? And, you know, here's an example of a noun. So if I look at these words, these are prime examples of words that I would, this, you know, the ED and the S, I mean, that's grammar too, right? So I have to teach my students those things. So I would teach a beginning student that. Now,
Okay.
if you have a student that's, you know, more advanced, they should be coming into you understanding what a noun is, understanding what an adjective is. But if not, then it's not difficult to say, you know, this is the part of speech and this is how we deal with that part of speech.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we going to get this information downloaded, or how do we get it?
Well, I uploaded the file with all of the slides.
Okay.
It's here in your chat window. If you open up the chat window, John, you should see a PDF icon. And you'll want to do that before we end the call. You can save it to your computer. I also have recorded the presentation, and what I can do is send out a link to the recording as well as to the slides. If you want to go back and listen to an explanation again, you'll have that at your disposal also.
Okay, it'll be full screen.
I'm sorry, what is that?
It will be full screen because right now it's only half screen. The
I think that's
presentation.
how you happen to be looking at it. It's on my screen. It should show up as full screen.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Heather. That was tremendous.
You're welcome.
That was a lot of information, and I like that you gave us a lot of concrete examples to use with our students. So hopefully all of you will be able to download that file so you can get those slides. If any of you have any difficulty, just send me an email and I'll make sure we get you a hard copy or
And
something that you can.
It's
Sorry, let me
taking
just-
a while to download. I'm only about halfway through, so.
Exactly.
Okay,
It's a
well,
huge
I'll
file.
stay on the call for a while to give you time to download it.
And if you if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so here I am at oaklandcc.edu. Yeah, just make sure that I know where you're from, like just say from, you know, Oakland Literacy Council, so that I'm like, who's this random person? I don't know that, just so I know where you're coming from, okay?
All right.
And what
Good
about,
work.
Lori, how do you want me to deal with that file with the vowels? Do you want me to try and put that in the chat right now?
Oh, that would be great. Yes.
Okay, I'll try. Let's see how I do that.
So in the chat window, can you guys see the PDF that I uploaded? There's a little Adobe Acrobat icon next to it. It says targeting, speaking, and
Yes.
listening.
I had no problem. I had no problem downloading that.
Okay, if you just double click on that, it should download to your computer.
Okay.
It's just a little slow.
Got it.
And Heather is going to upload that extra chart for you to download as well.
Lori, this is Julie. I don't see it in the chat. It may be very well because I'm using Chromebook, so I may email you to get that.
Okay. I am going to upload all of these to SharePoint so I can send you a link. It's a very big file. It's like 150 megabytes, so I can't do it through email, but I'll send you a link to where you can download it from the cloud.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody besides Julie having trouble downloading it?
Yeah, I can't. I don't know how. to.
Got
it. Yeah, I'm using a Chromebook as well.
Angela? Okay.
Got it.
I'm sorry. I don't know who. Mary, I seem to have just sent it to you. I sent you a pronunciation packet. Let me send it to everybody.
Okay.
Hold on.
So we had Julie, John, and Angela. Was there anybody else who needed the link to the packet to download after the?
There you go.
And
Now I've
it's
sent it to
also
everyone.
Carol Lally.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't download it either. It's Lisa Peruski.
Okay. We'll make sure you get it one way or the other.
Thank you.
All right.
I can also, Julia, or sorry, Lori, I can also send you, like I can put it in like a Google file or whatever and send you a link. Maybe that would be
That's what I'm
easier.
gonna do with them. We have SharePoint, which is like Google Drive.
Okay.
So
Okay, cool.
and I'm going to do that with the recording as well.
Okay, and then I'll
Lori?
email you this pronunciation packet as well. Okay.
Okay, sounds great.